You know what my wife does all day? Vince's voice carried across the private dining room, easily cutting through the low hum of conversation and the clinking of heavy silverware. He did not lower his volume. He wanted the audience. She sits at home, in pajamas, staring at a laptop. He paused, letting the words hang in the air just long enough to draw every eye at the table. I am out here closing deals, and she is right there on the couch. What are you doing today, babe? Watching Netflix? Laughter trickled around the table. It was not loud or genuine. It was the careful, measured sound people make when the boss tells a joke and expects a reaction. The candlelight flickered from the centerpieces, casting half of everyone's face in deep shadow and leaving the other half bright and exposed. A heavy, sweet scent drifted from Vince's collar every time he leaned forward. Tom Ford Oud Wood. It was sharp and distinct. He had reapplied it recently, hours after he left our house this morning. I kept my eyes focused on my plate, the serrated edge of my steak knife pressed into the porcelain. I cut my meat slowly. 1, 2, 3, perfectly even slices. My left thumb found my wedding ring, spinning the cold metal around my finger. Once, twice, 3 times. Across the table, a younger woman looked at me, then quickly dropped her gaze to her lap. She was a junior marketing director. Her name was Chloe, or maybe Claire. She was not laughing. Her silence was the loudest thing in the room. No, but seriously, Vince continued. He leaned back in his chair and reached over, resting a heavy hand on my shoulder. His fingers squeezed. It was a possessive grip, not an affectionate one. I keep telling her she needs a hobby, join a book club, something. Right, babe? Tell them what you actually did today. I stopped cutting. I read some reports. See? Reports. Vince threw his free hand up in mock exasperation. He looked around at the 4 people gathered around the table. She reads reports. I married an accountant who does not even work. Craig, the sales director sitting to Vince's right, let out a booming laugh. He needed a budget approval for the next quarter, and he was working hard to earn it. Next to him, Janine, the finance manager, took a slow sip of her water. Her eyes lingered on me a second too long. I met her gaze across the flickering candle. Neither of us blinked. I am Sloane Pryor Keating. I am 43 years old. 15 years ago, I founded Keating Consulting Group. I am the majority owner. The 4 people sitting at this table are my employees. They are eating a dinner I am paying for through the corporate card of the business I built from the ground up, but none of them know that. Honestly, I should have married younger. Vince said it directly to Craig, but his voice was pitched to ensure every person in the room heard it loud and clear. My wife is getting old. What is it they say? Hitting the wall? Complete silence dropped over the table, the kind of absolute, suffocating quiet that sucks the air right out of your lungs. Even Craig's obsequious laughter died in his throat. I did not feel a rush of anger in that immediate second. My mind went entirely blank, turning into a smooth white surface. I looked down at my hands. The knife, the fork, the silver band spinning on my ring finger. Then I looked up at the faces staring at me. I was sitting across from a husband who had just announced to his subordinates that I was past my prime, a burden he dragged along to corporate dinners. I could end this right now. I could say 3 words. I own Keating. I could watch the smug color drain from Vince's perfectly tanned face. I could watch Craig choke on his expensive wine. I chose silence. Silence had always been my armor. I set the knife and fork down, aligning them perfectly parallel to the edge of the plate. I picked up my linen napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and folded it neatly beside my glass. "Excuse me," I said. I stood up. I did not push my chair back violently. I did not storm out or make a scene. I picked up my bag, kept my spine perfectly straight, and walked out the door. Vince did not follow me. Outside, the March air in Manhattan was a sharp, biting cold. I stood on the edge of the sidewalk while the city noise rushed past me in a blur of headlights and sirens. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and scrolled through the contacts. My thumb hovered, then pressed a name. The line rang twice. "Dominic," I said, my breath pluming in the freezing air. "I need to see you on Monday morning. And this time, we are not waiting anymore." The key turned in the front door lock with a sharp metallic click. Our house in Westchester was entirely dark. The scent of vanilla and sandalwood candles had faded out days ago, leaving behind only the dry smell of oak floors and the heavy fabric of the living room sofa. My footsteps echoed lightly as I walked down the hall. I did not reach for the light switches. I knew exactly where everything was in the dark. I walked straight to my private office at the end of the corridor. It was the only room in the house that Vince never entered. He liked to call it my paperwork closet. I shut the door behind me and knelt on the rug. The wall safe opened with a quiet beep. Inside, the air felt cold and stale. I reached in and pulled out the thick stack of documents. The prenuptial agreement was right on top. I flipped to the last page, running my finger over Vince's signature. It was rushed, loopy, and barely legible. He had signed it on the night before our wedding, 11 years ago, without reading a single clause. I spun my wedding ring again, remembering the sharp sting of guilt I had felt that night. I had not trusted him, not even on day one. Beneath the prenup lay the operating agreement for the limited liability company, Prior Holdings, LLC. My maiden name was stamped in bold black ink across every page. That was the holding company that owned 100% of Keating Consulting Group. Next to it was a silver flash drive, Dominic's quarterly reports. I stared at the metal casing, remembering the email chain highlighted inside. Quarter 2 anomaly, Quarter 3 anomaly, Quarter 4. Pattern confirmed. At the very back of the safe sat a sealed, aged envelope. My father's handwriting was scrawled across the front. For Sloan, when you are ready. I did not touch it. I had not touched it in over a decade. I sat back against the wall and pulled my knees up. 6 months ago, when Dominic sent that first email flagging the financial anomalies, I could have acted. I had the power. I had the authority. But I did nothing. Taking action meant confirming the lie. Confirming the lie meant losing Vince. And losing Vince meant being entirely alone again, just like I was the day my father's heart gave out. I was 16 when I sat in the back row of that county courtroom. I watched Raymond Pryor, the smartest structural engineer in the state, systematically dismantle the business partner who had tried to steal his company. He won. He got everything back. He turned to me, smiled, and told me to always sign my name on the right line so they could never take what was mine. 2 weeks later, he was dead on the kitchen floor. He kept his company, but he lost his life, and I lost him. I learned the lesson perfectly. Build it yourself. Never rely on a partner. Hide your ownership behind layers of legal paper so nobody can ever see you coming. And then I married Vince. I pushed myself off the floor and walked over to my desk. I opened my laptop and bypassed the shared network, logging directly into my private, encrypted server. I opened the file Dominic had sent last month. The flagged expenses glowed bright white against the screen. $87,000 in client entertainment over 3 years. The receipts did not match any known corporate events. There were 12 hotel stays in Manhattan for out-of-town pitches. A vice president who lived in Westchester did not need a hotel in Manhattan for a pitch. None of the clients listed on the reports had ever confirmed those meetings. Then I opened the cross-referenced calendar. Vince had linked his tablet to our shared cloud account years ago and never bothered to understand how the syncing worked. Every Friday night was blocked out in bold red letters. Client development, do not disturb. 3 dinners at the same upscale restaurant, 3 months in a row. Table for 2. Paid for with the corporate card. I closed the laptop with a soft thud. The screen went black. 6 months, I whispered into the empty room. I gave you 6 months to stop. He had not stopped. I locked the documents back inside the safe, spun the dial, and lay down on the small leather sofa in the corner of my office. I was not going upstairs to that bed. The digital clock on the desk flipped to exactly 47 minutes past 1 in the morning when I finally heard the front door open. Vince's heavy footsteps moved through the foyer. I lay perfectly still, counting the seconds between each step. He did not pause at the bottom of the stairs. He did not walk down the hall to check my office. He went straight up to the second floor. He did not even call my name. The coffee shop was located far outside Manhattan, a quiet, unremarkable place tucked into a strip mall in New Jersey. It was completely off the grid for anyone at Keating Consulting. Dominic and I had been holding our off-the-record meetings here for 15 years. When I walked in at 7 on Monday morning, Dominic was already at the corner booth. His black coffee had stopped steaming. He was a former Marine, built like a cinder block, with salt and pepper hair cut close to the scalp. A faded scar ran down his left hand, resting next to his old Seiko watch. He never wore a suit to these meetings, just a plain navy sweater. I slid into the booth across from him. "Friday night?" Dominic asked. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. He did not bother with a greeting. "He called me old," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat, in front of Craig, Janine, and 2 of the new junior hires. Dominic stared at me. 5 full seconds ticked by. Craig laughed. Didn't he? They all laughed. Except Janine. Dominic nodded once. A sharp, tight movement. He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the scratched wooden table. The expense flag from the third quarter has grown. I traced it further over the weekend. We are looking at $42,000 in corporate gifts. I opened the folder. The top sheet was a vendor manifest. Gifts? Purchased on the company card, Dominic said. Shipped to an address that is not your house in Westchester, and definitely not the corporate office. I traced the printed address with my index finger. An apartment building in Murray Hill. I pulled the lease agreement for that unit, Dominic continued, leaning forward. The name on the lease is Piper Novak, our HR director. My hand tightened around the ceramic mug the waitress had just set down. The coffee was scalding, burning through the thick walls of the cup, but I did not let go. My face did not move. Inside, the last fragile, pathetic thread of denial snapped. I had known. For 6 months, I had known. But having a name, having an address, made it solid. It made it real. Miss Pryor, Dominic said softly. He caught himself immediately. Sloane, I am sorry. Old habit. It is fine, I managed to say, forcing my fingers to uncurl from the mug. There is something else, Dominic said, his expression hardening. A junior business analyst, Kira Yun. She filed a formal compliance report 6 months ago. She claimed a vice president was stealing credit for her project deliverables. I never saw it. Because HR closed it without an investigation, Dominic said. Who closed it? Piper Novak. The entire architecture of the fraud crystallized in my mind in a matter of seconds. An affair, embezzlement, and an HR director acting as a firewall to cover up the mess and bury employee complaints. 3 distinct, calculated layers of betrayal. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. I need a forensic accountant, I said, my voice finally finding its edge. Do not use anyone from the firm. I want an outsider, someone who does not know the players. Dominic nodded, already mentally drafting the secure emails. I have a contact. She is the best. Get her, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. And Dominic? Find out where that junior analyst lives. I want to meet Kira Yoon. The coffee shop in Cobble Hill was small and packed tight with small wooden tables. It was far away from the corporate territory of Midtown Manhattan. I chose a booth in the back corner and sat with my shoulders against the wall. It was a habit I picked up from my father. Never leave your back to a room. The air inside smelled heavy with dark roasted espresso and toasted sourdough bread. The yellow pendant lights overhead cast a warm glow against the condensation on the front windows. Kira Yoon walked in exactly 5 minutes late. She looked younger than 29, but the exhaustion pulling at the corners of her eyes aged her. She wore a simple dark blazer over a plain shirt and practical sneakers. She carried a canvas laptop bag that looked entirely too heavy for her thin frame. She scanned the room, spotted me, and walked over with careful steps. She slid into the booth across from me and set the bag on the table. It landed with a heavy thud, full of loose papers and files stuffed inside. She did not order anything. She just folded her hands on the table and looked at me. I am an investor in Keating Consulting, I said, keeping my voice low. The background noise of the espresso machine and the chatter from the front counter masked our words perfectly. I heard about the compliance report you filed. Kira did not relax. Her dark eyes narrowed slightly. Who told you about that? Someone in the company I trust. You mean Dominic Reeves, Kira said. She was sharp, sharper than I expected. I did not confirm or deny it. I just waited. Kira took a breath and leaned forward. He was the only person in that entire building who seemed to actually care when I sent the report. But he told me he did not have the authority to override human resources. And then nobody ever contacted me again. She unzipped her bag and pulled out a thick stack of printed emails. She laid them flat on the table between us. 3 projects, Kira said, tapping the top page. 3 major client deliverables. I did the research. I built the models. I created the slide decks. The first time Vice President Lassiter took my name off the final presentation, I thought it was an administrative mistake. The second time, I had an email trail proving I sent him the final drafts. I sent everything to Human Resources. Piper Novak told me she would investigate. And what did she find? I asked. Nothing, Kira said, her voice tightening. She dragged it out for a week and then sent me an official notice. Insufficient basis for a complaint. Case closed. And the third time? Kira reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black audio recorder. New York is a one-party consent state. I recorded the pitch meeting. He stood up there and read my slides word for word. He called it his team's work. The team was just me. I looked at the recorder, then back at Kira. What do you want from me? I am an investor. I could take this to the board of directors. Kira studied my face for a long time. She was weighing the risk of trusting a stranger against the exhaustion of fighting a losing battle. I need to know what you actually have before I agree to anything. I have access, I said simply, but I need to know what else you are holding. Kira reached back into the canvas bag. She pulled out a plain manila folder and pushed it across the table. I have a backup drive with all the original files. I have the metadata showing I created the documents. And I have this. I opened the folder. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a color printout of a photograph. Piper called me the day after she closed my report, Kira said softly. She told me to move on. She said Vince was valuable to the company and I should not make this the hill I die on. I wrote down every word she said the second I hung up the phone. But that photograph is from Piper's social media. She posted it 3 months ago. I looked down at the image. It was poorly lit, taken inside a dimly lit restaurant. Piper was holding a martini glass. Her fingernails painted a perfect, glossy red. She had cropped the photo carefully to focus on her face and the drink. But at the very edge of the frame, resting casually on Piper's waist, was a man's hand. The sleeve belonged to an expensive tailored suit, and the cufflink catching the light of the camera flash was distinctive. It was a custom silver square with a brushed finish. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to lead. I had bought those exact cufflinks for Vince last Christmas. For 6 months, I had suspected. I had seen the mismatched expense reports. I had noticed the strange Friday night routines. I had smelled the unfamiliar perfume clinging to his jacket. But looking at this photograph changed everything. Suspicion was a ghost you could ignore. Proof was a wall you crashed into. My husband was wearing the gift I bought him while holding the woman who was protecting him from getting fired. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. I kept my hands perfectly still so Kira would not see them shake. Keep this, I said. Keep it safe. And Kira, do not tell anyone you met with me today. Kira put the folder back in her bag. What are you going to do? I stood up and pulled a $20 bill from my wallet, leaving it on the table. I am going to read the reports. I walked out of the coffee shop. The Brooklyn wind whipped off the East River, cutting through my coat. The cold felt good. It kept my mind sharp. I pulled my phone out and dialed Dominic. He answered on the first ring. Engage the forensic accountant, I told him, into the wind. Tomorrow morning, I want to know every single dollar Vince Lassiter has spent in the last 3 years. By Thursday night, the silence in my empty house was deafening. I sat at the large oak desk in my private office, staring at 2 glowing monitors. The only light in the room came from the screens. On the left monitor, I had our shared cloud calendar open to Vince's schedule. On the right monitor, I scrolled through the corporate credit card statements Dominic had forwarded. I started cross-referencing the dates. Every single Friday for the past 18 months had an entry. He always blocked out the evening for client development. I tracked the credit card charges for those exact nights. A dinner at the same expensive restaurant, then a car service charge. The destination was always the same. The address in Murray Hill, Piper's apartment. He was remarkably consistent. He had a routine, and he stuck to it because he was comfortable. He believed no one was watching him. He thought he was untouchable. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my tired eyes. I had options. I could confront him right now when he walked through the door, but if I did that, he would deny everything. He would scramble to delete the evidence, and he would hire a lawyer by sunrise. I would lose the element of surprise. I could call Dominic and tell him to fire Vince quietly. I could stay hidden in the shadows. Vince would pack his desk, leave the building, and never know that his quiet, boring wife was the one who signed his termination papers. It was the safe choice. But it was not enough. Not anymore. I looked at a framed photograph sitting on the edge of my desk. It was from our wedding day. Vince was flashing his brilliant, charming smile. I was smiling too, but it was smaller, more reserved. 11 years. I had wanted a child for so long. Every time I brought it up, Vince had an excuse. He said it was not the right time. We needed more financial stability. His career was just taking off. Maybe next year. It was always next year. Now I understood why. My phone buzzed against the wood of the desk. I picked it up. A new text message from Vince lit up the screen. Working late. Do not wait up. I looked at the timestamp at the top of the screen. 11:12 at night. On a Thursday. I stared at the word Thursday. The routine had changed. He was not waiting for Friday nights anymore. The affair was escalating. He was getting sloppy, getting greedy. He is getting comfortable, I said out loud to the empty room. I set the phone face down. Time was no longer on my side. If he was getting this comfortable, the affair was deepening. If I did not move quickly, he might file for divorce first. If he initiated the legal process, the discovery phase would force me to reveal my assets. He would find out about the holding company. He would realize I owned the business he worked for. I would not let him control the narrative. On Saturday afternoon, I found myself walking down a busy street in Manhattan. I had not planned to come here, but my feet had carried me to the exact spot. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked through the large plate glass window of the upscale restaurant. It was the same place where we had eaten dinner 8 days ago. The staff was moving between the tables, setting out fresh linen and polishing wine glasses for the evening rush. I looked right at table 7, the exact chairs where we had sat. I could almost hear Craig's booming laugh echoing against the glass. I could hear Vince's voice floating over the table. My wife is getting old. I remembered staring at my knife and fork, making sure they were perfectly straight. Then another memory surfaced, pushing the humiliation aside. My father, standing in the courtroom, placing a heavy hand on my teenage shoulder. Sign your name on the right line, Sloan, and you lose nothing. I had followed his rules perfectly. I formed the limited liability company. I hid my maiden name in the operating agreements. I made Vince sign the prenuptial agreement. On paper, my father was right. I had not lost a single dollar, but I had lost 11 years of my life. I had lost the chance to have a family, and worst of all, I had lost the right to be called by my actual name in the company I built with my own 2 hands. I turned away from the glass window. The decision settled into my chest, heavy and cold and final. I pulled out my phone and called Dominic. Monday, I told him, as soon as he answered. I want the forensic accountant to start on Monday. And Dominic, I do not just want the expense reports. I want the complete picture. I want the human resources audit trails. I want the company phone records. I want the email server logs. Pull everything. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the traffic passing by on his end of the line. Are you absolutely sure about this? He asked. His voice was grim. Once we open all these doors, we cannot close them again. People are going to start asking questions. I looked down the long avenue, watching the city move and breathe around me. For the first time in a decade, I did not feel the urge to hide. I am sure, I said. Dominic exhaled slowly. It is about time. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The investigation was officially launched. There was no going back to the dark closet. Everything was about to see the light of day. Helen Price sat behind a wide glass desk in Midtown Manhattan. She was 58 years old, with sharp silver hair pulled into a severe knot and black-framed glasses resting on the bridge of her nose. Her white silk blouse was perfectly pressed. The room smelled of lemon polish and the faint ozone scent from a heavy-duty printer in the corner. Helen did not offer me coffee, and she did not offer me sympathy. She treated corporate fraud the way a mechanic looks at a broken engine. She laid the credit card statements out in 3 neat rows across the glass surface. Vice president level expenses typically get a rubber stamp, Helen said, her voice flat and precise. But $87,000 in client entertainment over 3 years without a single client confirming attendance? That is not careless. That is a system. I looked at the rows of numbers, tracing the dates with my eyes. Helen tapped a manicured fingernail against the bottom of the 3rd page. Who signs off on his reimbursements? The Human Resources Director, I said. Helen looked up over the rim of her glasses. And who audits the Human Resources Director? The silence stretched between us. The hum of the city traffic 14 floors below filled the quiet room. Nobody, Helen answered her own question. That is exactly how it operates. She leaned back in her heavy leather chair. This is not just overspending. This is an embezzlement scheme between 2 people, and your director is acting as the gatekeeper. The total exposure could be much higher than we think, if they are generating fake invoices from shell vendors that do not actually exist. I reached across the desk and signed the engagement letter. Helen would begin the full forensic dive the following week. On Wednesday night, at 8 o'clock, I stood on the sidewalk outside the Keating Consulting Building. I had not set foot inside this place in 3 years. I swiped my old security badge at the side entrance, holding my breath until the light flashed green. Dominic always kept my credentials active, burying them deep in the system under an administrative backup code. The elevator carried me up to the 14th floor. When the metal doors parted, the corridor was completely dark. Most of the staff went home by 6, leaving the space silent and empty. The heavy gray carpet swallowed the sound of my footsteps. The air felt chilled, carrying the faint, metallic scent of printer toner and stale coffee left too long on a warming plate. The green glow of the emergency exit signs cast long, unnatural shadows against the beige walls. The ventilation system hummed a low, steady drone above my head. I walked past the reception area and stopped in front of the Wall of Fame. A large acrylic board displayed the leadership team. Dominic was right in the center. Vince was beside him, flashing that practiced, brilliant smile. Piper was on the other side, wearing a tailored shift dress, her blonde hair falling perfectly over her shoulder. Craig and Janine flanked them. I scanned the faces. I was not up there. I owned the walls, the carpet, the server racks, and the paychecks of every single person on that board, but my face was nowhere to be found. I turned away and pushed open the heavy glass door to the main boardroom. The room was cavernous. A massive mahogany table stretched down the center, surrounded by 12 ergonomic leather chairs. Each chair had a small brass nameplate set into the wood in front of it. I walked slowly down the length of the table, reading the names in the dark. Dominic, Craig, Janine, Vince, Piper. I reached the head of the table. The chair at the very end was slightly larger than the rest. The brass plate bolted into the wood read S. Prior. I ran my fingertips over the metal letters. A thin layer of dust coated the surface. No one had ever sat in this chair during the entire 8 years Vince had worked here. It was a ghost seat for a ghost owner. I kept my hand resting on the top of the cold leather backrest. 15 years ago, I named this company Keating. It was my mother's maiden name, another layer of armor to hide behind. Then I buried the ownership inside Prior Holdings. Then I installed Dominic to stand in the spotlight and take the heat. I had wrapped myself in so many layers of protection that I had forgotten what it felt like to actually exist in the world. I thought about Kira Yun. She was a 29-year-old woman fighting for her career with her bare hands, armed with nothing but a cheap audio recorder and a desperate need for the truth. Kira had no armor. She had been buried by the very system I created, and I had allowed it to happen because I was too frightened to step out of the shadows. I pulled the heavy leather chair out and sat down. It was the first time I had ever occupied my own seat. The high back contoured perfectly to my spine. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure network. I logged into the chief executive portal, using the master password only Dominic and I knew. The screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I bypassed the standard employee directory and dropped straight into the human resources audit trail. I typed Kira Yoon into the search bar. The system pulled up her file instantly. I clicked on the compliance tab and scrolled down to the date Dominic had given me. There it was. Status marked as closed. Insufficient basis. Closed by P. Novak, Human Resources Director. I checked the timestamps. Piper had closed the investigation exactly 4 days after Kira submitted the evidence. I looked at the notification log at the bottom of the screen. Supervisor notified, read as not applicable. Piper had not told a single soul. She took the complaint, buried it in the digital graveyard, and then went out to dinner with my husband. I took a screenshot of the entire log and routed it to my encrypted email server. I closed the laptop, plunging the room back into darkness. I sat there for a few minutes longer, letting the silence settle around me. When I finally stood up, I looked down at the leather seat cushion. My weight had left a faint indentation in the material. For the first time in 8 years, the chair looked like it belonged to someone. I walked out of the boardroom and took the elevator back down to the lobby. As the car descended, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. I straightened my posture. I did not look like a woman hiding in a paperwork closet anymore. I looked exactly like the person who owned the building. Sunday morning arrived with bright sunlight spilling across the kitchen island. Vince was actually cooking brunch. It was a rare occurrence, usually reserved for birthdays or the morning after a particularly bad argument. He was in his full charming mode, flipping pancakes and whistling a tune I did not recognize. It was likely a cover for his guilt, or perhaps just the sheer arrogance of a man who believed he had outsmarted the world. "Hey," Vince said, gesturing with the spatula. "I was thinking we should go somewhere. Maybe take a trip up to the Berkshires next weekend. Just get away for a few days." I stood on the opposite side of the counter and poured myself a glass of cold water. "Since when do you want to get away?" "Come on, babe," he said, turning back to the stove. "I know I have been working a lot lately. You know how it is. Let me make it up to you." I took a slow sip of water and said nothing. The silence did not bother him. He was always perfectly happy to fill the empty space with his own voice. Besides, work has been absolutely crazy, Vince continued, shaking his head. Piper has been on my case about some ridiculous compliance thing. You know, human resources, they always have some administrative nightmare for me to deal with. I set my glass down on the granite counter. I moved very slowly. A compliance thing? Yeah, Vince said, flipping a pancake onto a porcelain plate. Some junior analyst filed a complaint about me. Can you believe it? I give that entire team my best material. I build their careers, and someone complains about project credit, recognition, something stupid like that. I do not even know the details. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Piper handled it. The words echoed in my head, looping over and over. Piper handled it. Vince had just unknowingly handed me the final confirmation I needed. He knew about Kira. He knew about the report. Piper had not closed the investigation because there was an insufficient basis. She closed it specifically for him, to protect him. I am sure Piper took care of it, I said, keeping my voice perfectly even. Vince turned around and flashed that brilliant smile. That is exactly what I keep her around for. He meant it as a joke about corporate efficiency. He had no idea he had just confessed to a coordinated conspiracy. I looked at my husband standing in my kitchen, holding a plate of food, completely oblivious to the trap closing around him. The debate in my head was officially over. I had crossed the threshold, and the investigation was moving forward. Now I just needed to let him keep talking while I built the cage. Helen Price did not waste time with pleasantries. When I walked into her midtown office on Wednesday morning of the third week, she already had the spreadsheets printed and laid out across the massive expanse of her glass desk. The room smelled sharply of lemon polish and the hot ozone of the heavy-duty printer churning out pages in the corner. Helen sat with her hands folded over a thick manila file, her silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. I took the chair across from her and looked down at the paper trail of my marriage. I have completed the first phase of the reconciliation, Helen said, her voice carrying the flat, clinical tone of a surgeon delivering a diagnosis. We have two distinct layers of misappropriation so far. The first layer is the expense fraud. Over the past 3 years, Vice President Lassiter submitted 47 separate receipts for client entertainment dinners. I had my team cross-reference every single date with the actual clients listed on his reports. 0 clients confirmed their attendance, not a single one. She slid a highlighted page toward me. I stared at the columns of numbers. He also expensed 12 hotel stays for out-of-town pitches, Helen continued. Except the hotels were all located in Manhattan. A vice president who lives in Westchester County does not need a hotel room in the city unless he is staying up late drinking with clients, which we already know he was not doing. The charges cluster almost exclusively around Friday and Saturday nights. I pressed my fingertips against the edge of the glass desk. The surface was freezing. And the second layer? Helen slid another document forward. Corporate gifts. $42,000 charged over 36 months. $12,000 spent at a jewelry store. Specifically on necklaces and bracelets. I had never received a single piece of jewelry from that store. $8,000 spent on weekend resort bookings. Helen read down the list without looking up. $3,600 a year on a recurring monthly floral delivery. The remaining balance went to high-end electronics, spa gift cards, and women's clothing. Every single physical item was shipped to the exact same address. Murray Hill, I said quietly. Piper Novak's apartment, Helen confirmed. When we combine the fabricated expenses with the unauthorized gifts, we have a confirmed total of $129,000, stolen from Keating Consulting. I looked at the number circled in red ink at the bottom of the page. It was enough money to hire 2 full-time junior analysts. It was enough to trigger a grand jury indictment. But we are not finished, Helen said, taking off her black-framed glasses and setting them on the glass desk. I suspect there is more. I found a pattern of vendor invoices from a small consulting firm called Latitude Solutions. They billed Keating $34,000 over the last 2 years for overflow strategy work. The company has no website, no digital footprint, and no physical office. They only have a post office box. My eyes snapped up to meet hers. A shell company? I am currently tracing the registered agent, Helen replied. But the post office box for Latitude Solutions is located in the exact same zip code as Piper Novak's apartment building. It is highly likely your human resources director is not just approving fake dinners. She might be generating fake vendor invoices to extract cash directly from the company accounts. I walked out of Helen's office an hour later with copies of the spreadsheets tucked into my leather bag. $129,000 was a certainty. Another $34,000 was pending verification. Piper Novak was not just sleeping with my husband. She was his accomplice in a systematic looting of my company. On Saturday afternoon, I took a car service out to Brooklyn to meet the woman who had tried to expose them. Kira Yoon lived in a small walk-up apartment in Cobble Hill. The wooden stairs creaked under my boots as I climbed to the third floor. When Kira opened the door, the scent of steeped green tea and old paperback books washed over me. Her apartment was tiny, but meticulously clean. Bookshelves lined every available inch of wall space, stacked high with economics texts and coding manuals. Her laptop sat open on a small dining table, lines of code reflecting in her dark eyes. She poured me a cup of tea and set it on the table. The ceramic mug was warm against my palms, a welcome contrast to the damp spring chill creeping through her window panes. "I brought what you asked for," Kira said. She sat across from me and pushed a small silver thumb drive across the wood. The screenshots of my compliance report, the closure email from Piper, the timeline of the 3 projects Vince stole from me, complete with the email chains and the original slide decks. The metadata proves I authored every single file weeks before he presented them. I looked at the drive, then up at the 29-year-old woman sitting across from me. She looked exhausted, carrying the specific kind of burnout that comes from doing all the heavy lifting while someone else collects the applause. "You did incredible work documenting this," I told her. Kira did not smile. She wrapped her hands tightly around her own mug. She stared down at the dark liquid for a long time before she spoke. "You should know something about Piper," Kira said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "She was my college roommate." I stopped breathing for a second. The tea burned the back of my throat as I swallowed. "We were close for 6 years, Kira continued, looking up at the ceiling as if trying to keep the tears from spilling over. I was the only person who knew how terrified she was of being invisible. She was absolutely desperate to climb the corporate ladder, terrified of being stuck in middle management forever. When Vince started mentoring her, I saw exactly what was happening. I warned her. I told her he was a married vice president, and that getting involved with him would destroy her career. She called me jealous." Kira took a shaky breath. 2 weeks after I warned her, she completely cut off our friendship. She stopped returning my calls. A year later, she buried my compliance report and told me to keep my mouth shut. I looked at Kira, feeling the full, crushing weight of my own cowardice. This young woman had lost her best friend, lost the credit for her hard work, and lost her faith in the system. And I, the chief executive sitting in a locked room in Westchester, had allowed the system to fail her because I was too frightened to confront my own husband. "Can I ask you a question?" Kira asked. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, piercing and direct. "You can ask anything." "You said you are an investor," Kira said, her tone sharpening. "That means you have power. You had the authority to step in from the very beginning. Why did you not do anything? Why did you let this happen?" The silence in the small apartment stretched out, heavy and thick. I could hear the faint sound of traffic rushing past the building 3 floors down. I could not give her the real answer. I was not ready to look a 29-year-old woman in the eye and say I hid behind my managing director because I was afraid of being seen. "I am intervening right now," I said softly. Kira studied my face. She was not satisfied with the answer, and I did not blame her. But she nodded slowly, accepting the evasion for the time being. "Okay," Kira said. "Then I need you to promise me something." "Name it." "When this is all over, when the board of directors finally pushes Vince out, I want my name restored to those 3 projects. I do not want a financial settlement. I do not want a discretionary bonus to keep me quiet. I want my name on the work I created." I looked at her. She was asking for the simplest, most fundamental right in the professional world. She just wanted to be seen. She wanted to exist under her own name. It was the exact same thing I had denied myself for 15 years. "You have my word," I promised. I left her apartment a few minutes later and stepped out onto the Brooklyn sidewalk. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, hitting me directly in the eyes. I did not squint or turn away. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was Helen Price. "Sloan," the forensic accountant said, skipping the greeting entirely. "I just pulled the registration records for Latitude Solutions." I traced the post office box back to the registered agent. "Is it Piper?" I asked, pulling my coat tighter against the wind off the river. "No," Helen said. Her voice carried a rare note of genuine surprise. "The name on the state registration documents is Vincent Lassiter." I stopped walking. The sidewalk around me seemed to tilt. Vince was not just using Piper to cover up his fake dinners. He had actively created a shell company to siphon cash out of my business, and he was using his mistress's zip code as a shield. The $34,000 in fake invoices brought the total confirmed theft to $163,000. "Keep digging, Helen," I said, my voice dropping to a dead calm. "Find every single wire transfer." I hung up the phone. The sun was bright, but I felt nothing but ice in my veins. By Sunday night, I was locked inside my private office in Westchester. Vince was asleep upstairs, having returned from a weekend golf trip he claimed was essential for networking. I stood in front of a large white dry erase board, holding a black marker. The smell of the alcohol ink was sharp and chemical in the enclosed space. I began to draw the timelines, structuring the chaos into cold, hard data. The first line was the affair. I mapped it out over 18 confirmed months. It started slowly. Months 1 through 6 were limited strictly to Friday nights. The same restaurant, the same expensive hotel. By month 7, the pattern shifted. He added Wednesdays. The hotel charges vanished, replaced by the lease agreement for the apartment in Murray Hill. From month 13 to 18, the restrictions disappeared entirely. He went to the apartment on any day of the week. The monthly flower deliveries began. The quarterly jewelry purchases hit the credit card. I drew a second line below it for the financial fraud. 3 full years. Year 1 was small, almost testing the waters. $29,000 in fake expenses. Year 2 escalated rapidly. The expenses continued, but the luxury gifts appeared, and the Latitude Solutions invoices began flowing through the accounting department. $48,000. Year 3 was completely unrestrained. $86,000 in 12 months. I drew the final line at the bottom of the board. The human resources cover-up. 3 years. 4 separate harassment complaints filed by female employees, including Kira. Every single one closed without an investigation by Piper Novak. 2 negative performance reviews written by senior managers about Vince's erratic behavior, heavily revised and sanitized by Piper before they ever reached his official personnel file. I stepped back and looked at the whiteboard. The pattern was undeniable. The affair had not just been a betrayal of our marriage vows. It had been a calculated business transaction. The affair created the protection. Piper shielded him from the consequences of his actions, and because he knew he was completely immune from human resources oversight, he escalated the embezzlement. Piper protected Vince, and Vince stole more money because he knew nobody was watching the gate. I stared at the black ink until the numbers blurred together. $163,000 stolen. 4 young women silenced and intimidated. 11 years of a marriage built entirely on a foundation of lies. And I, the chief executive officer of Keating Consulting, was standing in a locked room, drawing lines on a whiteboard all by myself. I dropped the dry erase marker. It hit the wooden floor and rolled under the heavy oak desk. I did not bend down to pick it up. "Enough," I said to the empty room. I had spent 6 months gathering the evidence. I had hired the accountant. I had secured the witness. I had mapped out every single dollar and every single lie. The case was built. The fun and games of playing the silent detective were officially over. It was time to figure out exactly how I was going to burn his world to the ground. The heavy rain off the Atlantic coast washed over the New Jersey Turnpike, blurring the headlights of the early morning commuter traffic. I sat in the same corner booth of the diner, listening to the steady drumming of the water against the thick glass window. The smell of fried potatoes and dark roasted coffee hung in the warm air. Dominic sat across from me. He wore his usual navy sweater, his broad shoulders squared, his posture carrying the rigid discipline of a man who had spent his youth in the Marine Corps. I opened my leather bag and began pulling out the physical evidence of my ruined marriage. I laid the documents across the scratched wooden table, lining them up with deliberate precision. First was the thick forensic accounting report Helen Price had finalized over the weekend. Next was the stack of printed emails and metadata logs I had collected from Kira Yoon in Brooklyn. Beside that, I placed the state registration papers for Latitude Solutions, clearly displaying Vincent Lassiter as the sole owner of the shell company. Finally, I set down the human resources audit trail showing exactly when and how Piper Novak had buried 4 separate employee complaints. Dominic did not touch his coffee. He picked up the forensic report first. He read the summary page, his eyes tracking the columns of numbers. He flipped to the state registration documents, tracing my husband's name with his scarred index finger. He read through Kira's emails, examining the timestamps and the metadata, proving the theft of her project deliverables. 20 minutes passed. The diner buzzed with the morning rush, but our corner booth felt entirely isolated from the rest of the world. Dominic did not say a single word until he had read the very last page of the Human Resources audit log. He closed the file and folded his hands on top of the manila folder. "This is enough to fire him for cause," Dominic said. His gravelly voice was low, barely audible over the clattering of dishes from the kitchen. "It is enough to refer the entire file to the Manhattan District Attorney if you want to pursue a criminal prosecution for the embezzlement. It is definitely enough to win a divorce proceeding where he does not get to keep a single button on his expensive tailored suits." I looked down at my hands resting on the edge of the table. "I know. So what is the question?" Dominic asked. "The question is the execution," I replied, meeting his steady gaze. "The question is how we actually do this." Dominic leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He had clearly been thinking about this exact moment for weeks. "I recommend the quiet option. I can execute the termination this coming Friday. I will call Vince and Piper into separate conference rooms at exactly 9 in the morning. I will present them with the termination papers. The official reason will be corporate restructuring and a zero-tolerance policy for expense protocol violations. There will be no board meeting. There will be no public drama. Security will escort them out of the building by 10 o'clock. He paused, letting the strategy settle between us. "You keep your secret. The company does not suffer a public shock. The employees do not panic about a leadership scandal. Vince walks out the door believing he was caught by a routine financial audit. He will never know you were the one standing behind the curtain." I looked out the window at the driving rain. The quiet option, the safe option. The words felt like a warm blanket wrapping around my exhausted shoulders. I could stay hidden in my locked office in Westchester. I would not have to stand in front of 120 employees and endure their stares, their whispers, their judgment. I would not have to explain why I had lied to them for 15 years. I could sever the infection and walk away clean. "All right," I said, feeling the tight knot in my chest loosen just a fraction. "Do it." Friday morning. Dominic nodded once. The relief of having a concrete plan settled over the table. It was a flawless strategy. No risk, no exposure, a perfectly executed, sterile removal of the threat. But as I reached across the table to gather the documents, my fingers brushed against the stack of emails from Kira Yoon. I stopped. I looked at the name printed at the top of the project files. "Dominic," I said slowly. "What about Kira?" Dominic kept his hands on his coffee mug. He did not look at me. "I will protect her position," he said. "I will make sure she gets a promotion and a significant raise after the dust settles next month." "And her name?" I asked, leaning closer. "What about putting her name back on the 3 projects Vince stole from her?" Dominic finally looked up, his expression tight. "Sloan, if I announce to the entire company that the vice president stole deliverables from a junior analyst, I have to explain why the human resources director covered it up. If I reveal the fraud and the cover-up, I have to reveal the investigation. And if I reveal the depth of this investigation, I cannot keep you hidden anymore. People will demand to know who authorized a forensic audit of a senior executive." The silence returned, heavier this time. "I will find a way to take care of Kira quietly," Dominic offered. I pulled my hand back from the documents. I knew exactly what that meant. The quiet option protected me, but it denied Kira the one thing she had specifically asked for. It denied her the right to be seen. I was choosing my own comfort over her justice. "Set up the Friday terminations," I told Dominic, packing the files into my bag. "I will figure out the rest." By Wednesday night, the quiet option felt like a lead weight pressing down on my lungs. The house in Westchester was completely silent. Vince was out, claiming he had a late networking dinner in the city. I was locked inside my private office, sitting at the heavy oak desk with my laptop open. I was reviewing the final drafts of the termination emails Dominic had prepared. The language was clinical and precise. "Effective immediately, due to internal corporate restructuring. Your employment is terminated." I read the words over and over, trying to find a sense of victory in the legal phrasing. My phone vibrated violently against the wood of the desk. I looked at the screen. It was not a text message. It was an incoming file transfer request over the local wireless network. An airdrop notification. The request was coming from the shared tablet we kept in the living room. Vince used that tablet to read sports articles and look up recipes. He had linked his cloud account to it years ago and routinely forgot to disconnect his messaging applications. I stared at the glowing prompt on my phone. Incoming image from Vince. Accept or decline. I pressed accept. The wireless connection was slow. The image loaded onto my screen pixel by pixel, slowly rendering from top to bottom. It was a grayscale picture. It was fuzzy, full of static and strange curved shadows. I did not understand what I was looking at for several long seconds. It looked like a weather radar or a sonar scan. Then my eyes caught the white text printed in the upper right corner of the image. The name of a medical clinic in Manhattan, a date from 3 days ago, and the patient name, Novak, Piper A. My gaze dropped to the bottom of the screen. Gestational age, 9 weeks. It was an ultrasound. The air vanished from the room. My lungs stopped expanding. I sat perfectly still in the leather chair, staring at the small, bean-shaped blur resting in the center of the dark gray static. 9 weeks. My mind, trained to process data and trace patterns, immediately did the math. 9 weeks pregnant meant conception had occurred roughly 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks ago, I was sitting in my office reading the very first email from Dominic flagging the expense anomalies. 7 weeks ago, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, looking at a photograph of my husband's hand resting on Piper's waist. While I had been agonizing over spreadsheets, consulting forensic accountants, and wrestling with the terrifying prospect of dismantling my life, my husband had been building an entirely new family. Vince must have received the image from Piper on his phone. He had saved it, and the cloud storage system had automatically synced the photograph to the tablet sitting on the coffee table downstairs. And because the tablet was in range of my phone, the system had offered to share the recent file. He had no idea the network was broadcasting his secret through the walls of our house. I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking so badly the edges of the screen blurred. 11 years. We had been married for 11 years. Every time I brought up having a child, he had a perfectly reasonable excuse ready. "We are not financially stable enough yet," he would say. "My career needs my full focus right now," he would promise. "Let us wait until after the next promotion. Next year, babe, always next year." I looked at the tiny white blur on the screen. He had never wanted to wait. He just had never wanted a child with me. The pain did not hit me like a wave. It hit me like a collapsing building. It crushed the breath out of me, pinning me to the chair. I wanted to scream, but my throat was completely paralyzed. I set the phone down on the desk, then picked it up again. I locked the screen, then unlocked it just to stare at the image again, torturing myself with the undeniable proof of my own obsolescence. My phone rang in my hand, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. It was Dominic. I swiped the screen to answer and pressed the phone to my ear. I could not speak. "Sloan," Dominic said. His voice was crisp and professional. "I am confirming the schedule for Friday. The termination letters are printed and waiting in my safe. The security team has been briefed on the protocol. Information technology is standing by to revoke their server access at exactly 8 in the morning. Are you clear to proceed?" I looked at the glowing whiteboard across the room. I looked at the carefully drawn timelines. The dates of the hotel stays, the amounts of the stolen money, the list of the buried complaints, and now, the ultrasound resting on my desk. "Piper is pregnant," I whispered. The line went dead quiet. For the first time in 15 years, Dominic Reeves did not have an immediate response. I heard him take a sharp breath, the sound of a soldier realizing the battlefield had fundamentally changed underneath his boots. "Does this change the plan?" Dominic finally asked. His voice was tight with carefully controlled anger. I looked back at the screen. The quiet option. The safe route. If I let Dominic fire them on Friday under the guise of corporate restructuring, Vince would leave the building feeling like a victim of bad luck and corporate downsizing. He would go straight to Piper's apartment in Murray Hill. He would comfort her. They would pool the money he had stolen from me, the money sitting in the Latitude Solutions bank accounts. They would buy a house. They would have the baby. He would tell his new child stories about how he built Keating Consulting from the ground up, only to be unfairly pushed out by a jealous managing director. He would get to keep his hero narrative, and I would stay hidden in the dark, the invisible wife who just faded away. "It changes absolutely everything," I said, my voice gaining strength with every word. "The Friday plan is off the table?" Dominic asked. "Cancel it," I told him. "Put the termination letters in the shredder." I ended the call and deleted the ultrasound image from my phone. I had already routed a copy to the secure server. I did not need to look at it anymore. I lay down on the small leather sofa in the corner of my office and stared up at the dark ceiling. I did not cry. Crying was for people who believed things could go back to normal. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, watching the shadows shift across the walls, waiting for the sun to rise. At noon on Thursday, I drove into Manhattan. I did not have an appointment. I did not text Dominic to tell him I was coming. I parked my car 3 blocks away and walked to the Keating Consulting building. I bypassed the main lobby and the reception desk. I swiped my administrative badge at the service entrance and took the freight elevator up to the 14th floor. When the metal doors opened, I stepped out into the concrete stairwell. The air smelled of cement dust and old floor wax. I walked up to the heavy steel fire door that opened into the main hallway. I cracked it open just a fraction of an inch. The narrow sliver of light gave me a direct view of the corridor outside the Human Resources Department. I stood in the cold stairwell and waited. 10 minutes later, the door to the Human Resources suite swung open. Piper walked out, holding a stack of file folders. She was wearing a tailored navy dress, her blonde hair catching the overhead fluorescent lights. A moment later, Vince stepped out behind her. I watched my husband interact with the woman carrying his child. He smiled at her. It was not the loud, performative smile he used on Craig at the dinner table. It was a soft, genuine expression. He reached out and placed his hand on the small of her back as they walked down the hallway together. It was a familiar, deeply intimate gesture. There was no hesitation, no nervous glancing around to see who was watching. They were entirely comfortable in their shared space. Piper said something I could not hear through the heavy glass. She laughed, a real, bright sound that echoed down the hall. As she laughed, her free hand drifted down to rest gently over her flat stomach. It was a completely unconscious movement, a protective instinct she probably did not even realize she was doing. I stood frozen in the stairwell. Watching them together triggered a completely different kind of agony. It was not the sharp sting of betrayal or the cold fury of the financial theft. It was the hollow, devastating realization that they were actually happy. My husband was capable of genuine joy and quiet affection. He was capable of building a life and planning a future. He just wanted to do all of those things with someone else. I let the heavy steel fire door swing shut. The latch clicked into place with a loud, metallic thud, sealing me back inside the concrete stairwell. I did not take the freight elevator back down. I walked down the stairs. 14 flights. I counted every single step, letting the repetitive motion ground me. By the time I reached the ground floor, my legs were burning and the cold clarity in my mind had hardened into solid steel. I pushed through the exit door and stepped into the main lobby. The polished marble floors gleamed brightly under the recessed lights. I adjusted my coat and started walking toward the revolving glass doors leading out to the street. As I passed the central reception desk, a large, glossy poster mounted on a silver easel caught my eye. I stopped and turned to look at it. The poster was an internal company announcement, printed in bold corporate blue letters. Keating Consulting Annual Company Meeting, April 12. I stared at the date. April 12 was exactly 3 weeks from today. It was the one day of the year when every single department head, every board member, and every senior executive gathered in the main boardroom for a comprehensive review of the company operations. I looked at the poster for a long time. The quiet option was dead. Firing them secretly in a conference room on a Friday morning was no longer an acceptable outcome. Vince wanted to play the hero of his own story. Piper wanted to climb the ladder and claim her prize. They wanted to build their perfect new life using the money they had stolen from my accounts. An idea began to take root in my mind. It was a terrifying idea. It would require me to abandon every rule of survival my father had ever taught me. It would require me to walk into a room full of people who thought they knew exactly who I was, and show them they were wrong. It would require a public execution, witnessed by the very people Vince had spent 8 years trying to impress. It meant I had to step into the light. I pulled out my phone and dialed Helen Price. "Helen," I said, my voice steady and completely calm. "I need the final forensic report bound and certified. And I need you to recommend the most aggressive divorce attorney in the state of New York. We have 3 weeks to prepare for a very public presentation." The quiet option was officially dead, buried the moment I looked at the ultrasound on my phone. By Monday morning of the 5th week, my new strategy was already in motion. Helen Price worked with terrifying speed. She did not just compile spreadsheets. She filed a formal request for an internal vendor audit on Latitude Solutions, submitting the paperwork directly through Keating Consulting's finance department. That was the tripwire. Whenever an external audit request targets a vendor closely associated with a senior executive, the finance department automatically notifies corporate legal. The legal team, following standard protocol, issues a preservation notice to the human resources director. At 10 o'clock on Monday morning, Piper Novak received an automated legal alert on her desktop computer. I was sitting in my locked office in Westchester when Dominic called me on the encrypted line. His voice was sharper than usual, stripped of its normal, measured calm. "They know," Dominic said immediately. "Helen's audit request triggered the internal compliance system. Piper got the notification 40 minutes ago. She knows someone is looking at Latitude Solutions." I stopped typing on my laptop and leaned back in my chair. "How much does she know?" "Not everything," Dominic replied, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background. The alert only mentioned a forensic vendor reconciliation. It did not mention the expense fraud, the hotel rooms, or the jewelry. But she panicked. She picked up her office phone and called Vince directly at his desk. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. "And you have the audio." "The corporate phone system records all internal and external calls for quality assurance and legal compliance," Dominic said. "It is buried in the employment contracts they both signed years ago." I pulled the recording the second the system flagged a high-priority call between their extensions. Dominic played the audio file over the line. Piper's voice sounded thin and reedy, stripped of all her usual polished confidence. She told Vince they had a massive problem. She read the legal notice out loud, her breath hitching when she said the words, "forensic audit." There was a long pause on the recording before Vince spoke. His voice was incredibly calm, almost dead. He asked her who authorized it. Piper said she did not know, that the notice had just appeared in her inbox. Then my husband gave the order. "Delete everything. The human resources records, the expense approvals, the Latitude invoices. Delete it all." Piper tried to argue, pointing out that erasing files during an audit would leave a digital trail. Vince cut her off, raising his voice to a harsh bark. He told her to do exactly what he said, and that he would handle the rest. The recording clicked off, leaving a heavy silence on the line. "Piper is currently purging her hard drive," Dominic said. "I am watching her system access logs right now. She is deleting emails, vendor contracts, and performance reviews. Do you want me to lock her out of the network?" I looked at the framed photograph of my father sitting on my desk. He had taught me to always let a thief dig their own grave before you hand them the shovel. "No," I told Dominic. "Let her delete whatever she wants." Dominic paused. "Sloan, if she destroys the original files before we secure them—" "She cannot destroy the originals," I interrupted, my voice completely steady. "The company server runs a deep backup every 6 hours. It is an immutable audit log. She is only deleting her local copies. The server retains the originals, along with a timestamp, her user identification code, and the exact moment she attempted to erase them. Let her keep going. Every single file she deletes just adds a charge of destruction of corporate records to her termination file." "Understood," Dominic said. "But Vince said he would handle the rest. He knows someone is coming for him." "I know," I said. "I will be ready." When I arrived home on Tuesday night, the house was supposed to be empty. I usually returned to a dark driveway and a quiet foyer. But as I pulled my car up to the garage, I saw light spilling out across the manicured lawn. Every single lamp and overhead fixture in the living room was blazing. It looked like an interrogation room. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the sharp, medicinal smell of expensive whiskey. Vince was sitting on the center cushion of the living room sofa. The television was off. He was not looking at his phone. He was just waiting, staring directly at the front door. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His jaw was locked tight, a thick vein pulsing visibly against the side of his neck. Both of his hands rested on his knees, clenching into fists, and then slowly opening again. A crystal tumbler sat on the coffee table in front of him, filled with amber liquid and melting ice. "Sit down," Vince said. It was not a request. It was a command. I did not sit. I stayed exactly where I was, standing in the archway of the living room with my heavy wool coat still buttoned to my chin. I kept my hands resting inside my pockets. "Someone is running a forensic audit on my expenses," Vince said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, threatening register. "At my company. Do you know anything about that?" I raised an eyebrow. "Your company?" "Do not play games with me, Sloan." He stood up, towering over the coffee table. He picked up the crystal glass, the ice clinking loudly against the rim. Did you call someone? Did you hire a private detective? Because you are paranoid? Because you have absolutely nothing better to do with your days than sit in this house and invent wild conspiracy theories about me? He took a step forward, building his narrative. He was aggressive and entirely confident in his own spin. He was trying to construct a reality where I was the crazy, jealous housewife, and he was the victim of my baseless insecurities. You have always been exactly like this, Vince continued, his voice echoing off the high ceiling, checking my schedule, reading into every little thing I say, suffocating me. This is exactly why I cannot breathe in this marriage anymore. No one is auditing you because I am paranoid, Vince, I said quietly. Maybe it is just routine compliance. Vice presidents get audited all the time. Routine? He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. They subpoenaed bank records. Bank records, Sloan, of a consulting company I use for overflow work. That is not a routine compliance check. A consulting company you own? I asked. Vince stopped moving. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. I watched the realization wash over his face, draining the color from his cheeks. His eyes darted across my face, searching for a sign, a tell, trying to calculate exactly how much I knew. Latitude Solutions is a legitimate business, he said, his voice losing a fraction of its thunder. I did not say the name, I replied. The silence in the living room became absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Vince stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He had trapped himself, and he knew it. But a man like Vince did not apologize when he was backed into a corner. He attacked. He set the glass down on the table with a loud crack. He switched tactics instantly, abandoning the righteous anger and moving straight into a targeted threat. Listen to me very carefully, Vince said, pointing a finger directly at my chest. If you are behind this, if you hired some amateur auditor to harass my vendors, I will take you to court. I will take this house. I will take half of every single thing we own. You think your little family trust fund is safe? My lawyer says differently. I kept my face perfectly still. Your lawyer? Yeah, Vince sneered, regaining his footing. I called Harvey Roth this afternoon. He says in the state of New York, equitable distribution means I get half the marital assets, including whatever your father left you when he died. The blood rushed in my ears, a roaring sound that nearly drowned out his next words. He had said the word half, and he had dared to mention my father, the man he had never even met, because Raymond Pryor had died long before Vince ever stepped into my life. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement of a man who had stolen $163,000 from my company, demanding half of everything my father had built. I felt a surge of pure, white-hot fury burn through my chest, but I compartmentalized it immediately. I pushed the anger down into a small, dark box and locked it tight. I could process the rage later. Right now, I needed to survive the conversation. Half, I repeated, my voice dropping to a flat, dead calm. You want half. I am entitled to half, Vince shot back, stepping around the coffee table. 11 years, Sloan. 11 years I have busted my back to support this household while you managed your little paperwork closet. Harvey will tear you apart in a courtroom. I unbuttoned my wool coat slowly. I slipped it off my shoulders and hung it carefully on the wooden rack by the door. Every single movement was deliberate and measured. I smoothed the fabric down, refusing to look at him. Good night, Vince, I said. I turned my back on him and walked toward the stairs. I did not run. I took each step at a steady, even pace. Behind me, I heard a sudden, violent crash. Vince had swept his arm across the coffee table, sending the crystal tumbler flying. It hit the thick rug and did not shatter, but the ice and whiskey scattered across the floor. I walked into my private office and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I sat down in the dark, resting my head in my hands. Vince had lawyered up, and he had not just called any attorney. Harvey Roth was a notorious Manhattan shark, famous for dragging out high-asset divorces and bleeding the opposing side dry through endless discovery motions. If Vince filed the divorce papers first, he would control the timeline. The discovery process would force me to disclose all of my assets immediately, completely destroying my element of surprise. The walls were closing in, and the air was getting incredibly thin. By Thursday afternoon, the house was empty. Vince had packed a single suitcase while I was in my office and left. He did not say where he was going, but I did not need to ask. He was sleeping at the apartment in Murray Hill. The temporary separation gave me physical space, but the anxiety in my chest only tightened. Dominic called me again on the encrypted line just before lunch. Piper finished her purge, Dominic reported. The exhaustion was evident in his gravelly voice. She permanently deleted 4 compliance reports, including the one Kira filed. She wiped the entire expense approval chain for the Latitude Solutions invoices. She deleted 3 separate email threads where she explicitly told junior staff to stop asking questions about Vince. She even erased the original drafts of his performance reviews. And the server backups? I asked, gripping the edge of my desk. The backups are secure, Dominic confirmed. We have the original files safely locked away. Her deletions did not touch the master drives. But Sloan, we have a much bigger problem. I closed my eyes. Harvey Roth. Yes, Dominic said. If Vince files for divorce by the end of this week, we lose the initiative. Roth will file an emergency discovery motion. He will demand full access to your financial records. He will find out about prior holdings. And he will realize you own Keating Consulting before we ever get to the board meeting. The April 12 presentation is 2 weeks away. We do not have 2 weeks. I rubbed my temples, trying to ease the pounding headache building behind my eyes. The timeline was severely compressed. Everything was accelerating far beyond my control. There is one more thing, Dominic said quietly. Janine from the finance department came to my office this morning. She closed the door and asked me if I knew who S. Pryor was. She said she was walking past the boardroom late last night and noticed the dust had been wiped off the brass nameplate at the head of the table. She is starting to ask questions. My network of secrets was tearing apart at the seams. Helen's audit had spooked Piper. Piper had spooked Vince. Vince had hired a shark. And now Janine was sniffing around the empty chair in the boardroom. The dark closet I had hidden inside for 15 years was suddenly flooded with floodlights, and I was completely exposed. Hold the line, Dominic, I said. Do not answer Janine's questions. Just give me some time to figure out our next move. I ended the call and looked down at my cell phone resting on the desk. The screen was lit up with notifications. 23 missed calls from Vince over the last 48 hours. He had been calling relentlessly since he walked out the door. I had not answered a single one. I tapped the screen and opened the voicemail inbox. I did not listen to the audio files. I just read the automated transcripts the phone generated, treating his voice like cold, hard data. The first 5 calls were furious and demanding. Sloan, pick up the phone. We need to talk. You are making a massive mistake. This is a misunderstanding. Calls 6 through 12 shifted into legal threats. You cannot do this to me. I have rights in this marriage. Harvey says you have to disclose everything. Pick up the damn phone. Calls 13 through 18 were different. The anger was gone, replaced by a creeping, desperate panic. Okay. I am sorry about the glass. Can we just talk like adults? Please, babe, just call me back. Let us work this out. The final 5 calls were completely blank. 10 seconds of silence, heavy breathing, and then a click. I stared at the transcripts. 23 calls meant he was completely terrified. He was trapped in the dark. He did not know what evidence I actually had, he did not know who the auditor was, and he did not know what I was going to do next. He was swinging wildly between threatening to destroy me and begging me to forgive him, completely unaware that his mistress was pregnant with his child, while he was trying to negotiate his way back into my house. But his panic was dangerous. A terrified man with an aggressive lawyer was a grenade with the pin pulled out. I looked at the whiteboard across the room. The board meeting was still 14 days away. If I waited for April 12, Harvey Roth would file the divorce papers, and Vince would strike first. I would spend the next 3 years fighting a brutal, bloody war in a Manhattan courtroom, watching my company get dragged through the mud while Vince played the victim. The old Sloan would have retreated. She would have called Dominic, authorized the quiet option, paid Vince a massive settlement to go away, and locked the door behind him. But the old Sloan was dead. I picked up my phone and dialed Helen Price again. The all-is-lost moment had arrived, and the only way out of the burning building was to walk directly through the fire. The house in Westchester belonged entirely to me for the first time in 11 years. Vince had packed his leather duffel bag earlier in the week and relocated to the apartment in Murray Hill. He framed his departure as a temporary separation, claiming we both needed space to cool down, but we both knew exactly where he was sleeping. The silence inside the house was absolute. I walked through the dark living room on Friday night, listening to the faint hum of the kitchen refrigerator and the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I had not bothered to turn on the lamps. No vanilla candles were burning. The air smelled of cold oak floors and emptiness. I went into my private office and knelt in front of the wall, safe. The dial spun under my fingers with familiar, metallic clicks. I pulled the heavy steel door open. The moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating the stack of legal documents I had memorized over the past 6 months. The prenuptial agreement, the corporate holding filings, the forensic spreadsheets. I bypassed all of them and reached for the very back of the safe. My fingers brushed against the thick, aged paper of the sealed envelope. My father had given it to me 2 weeks before he died. For Sloan, when you are ready. His handwriting was a sharp, slanted script that commanded authority even in ink. I had kept the envelope sealed for over a decade. I had always convinced myself that opening it meant acknowledging he was truly gone. But as I sat on the floor of my dark office, surrounded by the paper trail of my broken marriage, I realized I had not been avoiding my father's death. I had been avoiding his life. I slid my thumb under the flap and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed legal paper and a small, stiff rectangle of cardstock. I pulled the letter out and unfolded it. Sloan, my father had written, if you are reading this letter, it means you are hurting. And if you are hurting, I want you to know that I hurt too. When my partner lied to me and tried to steal the company I built, I thought the world was ending. I fought back. I took him to court. I won every single penny back. But do you know what my biggest regret is? I stopped reading. My chest tightened, a heavy pressure building behind my ribs. My biggest regret is not that I was betrayed, the letter continued. My regret is that I hid. I hid my pain from the world. I hid the courtroom battles from my friends. I hid my fear from you. I never let a single person see me bleed. And the result of all that armor is that I am sitting in my kitchen at 3 a.m, ignoring a terrible pain in my chest, because I am simply too proud to call an ambulance and let the neighbors see me carried out on a stretcher. I traced his signature at the bottom of the page. Do not be like me, Sloan. Do not hide your strength so deeply that you die from the weight of it. Step out into the light, even if it blinds you. I folded the letter with shaking hands. I picked up the small rectangle of cardstock that had fallen out of the envelope. It was a business card. The edges were slightly frayed, the ink faded from years of storage. Helen Price, Certified Fraud Examiner. My breath caught in my throat. My father had known Helen. He had likely used her services 27 years ago when he was building the case against his own treacherous business partner. Dominic had not just picked a random accountant out of a corporate directory. He had found the exact woman my father had trusted. I sat on the floor and let the truth wash over me. I had modeled my entire adult life after my father. I built an empire. I hid my ownership behind layers of corporate holding companies. I used a managing director as a shield. I married a man I did not fully trust and made him sign a prenuptial agreement on the eve of our wedding. I thought I was being incredibly wise. I thought I was protecting myself. But hiding had not protected me at all. It had only ensured that my husband never actually knew the woman he married. It ensured that Kira Yoon was silenced by human resources without anyone coming to her defense. It ensured that 120 employees went to work every day without knowing the name of the woman signing their paychecks. My father won his lawsuit, but he died completely alone on his kitchen floor. I owned a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, but I was sitting alone in the dark. The pattern was repeating itself flawlessly. I stood up. I slipped the letter and the business card into the inside pocket of my blazer, pressing them close to my chest. I pulled my phone out and called Dominic. He answered immediately, the sound of a television playing softly in the background. Dominic, I said. My voice sounded different. The tremor of anxiety was completely gone, replaced by a cold, resonant clarity. The board meeting on April 12. We are not sending a quiet restructuring email. We are holding the meeting. Dominic muted his television. You are sure? I will be there, I told him. And I will be the one speaking. Finally, Dominic said. A deep, heavy sigh of relief carried over the line. Finally, I echoed. On Saturday morning, the 3 of us gathered in Helen Price's office. The glass desk was clear of the usual spreadsheets. Today, we were building a timeline. The strategy relies entirely on filing the divorce petition first, Helen explained. She walked over to a whiteboard on the wall and picked up a red marker. If we wait for your husband's attorney to make the first move, we lose control of the narrative. We file the petition on Monday morning. The moment the paperwork is stamped by the county clerk, an automatic temporary restraining order goes into immediate effect under New York domestic relations law. Meaning his accounts are frozen, I said. Exactly, Helen confirmed, drawing a heavy line under the word Monday. The order legally prohibits him from transferring, selling, or hiding any marital assets. He will be completely locked out of his personal brokerage accounts and the joint savings. We serve him the papers on Tuesday. That gives him exactly 48 hours to panic before the board meeting on Thursday. Dominic leaned forward in his chair. And the corporate side? I have the presentation ready, I said. We will project the forensic evidence onto the main screen in the boardroom. The $87,000 in fabricated client entertainment, the $34,000 in fake Latitude Solutions invoices, the $42,000 in unauthorized gifts shipped to his mistress. Total dissipation of corporate assets stands at $163,000. Helen tapped the board. I will forward the certified forensic report to his attorney, Harvey Roth, at the exact same moment you start your presentation on Thursday. Roth is a shark, but he is not a fool. When he sees the documented felony embezzlement, he will realize his client lied to him. Roth will likely drop him as a client by lunch. What about the prenuptial agreement? Dominic asked. The infidelity clause is ironclad, Helen said with a sharp, satisfied smile. By violating the marital contract, your husband automatically forfeits any equitable claim to your separate property. Prior Holdings was formed 4 years before the marriage. It is a premarital asset. He will not get a single share of Keating Consulting. Dominic turned to me. I will configure the network security protocols on Wednesday night. At exactly 8 in the morning on Thursday, I will revoke Vince's building access badge and lock his computer credentials. I will do the same for Piper Novak at 7:45. By the time they arrive for the board meeting, they will be completely locked out of the system. The plan was a machine. It was precise, ruthless, and entirely legal. It was the exact opposite of the quiet option. We were going to pull the fire alarm, lock the doors, and watch them burn. There is one loose end, I said, looking at Dominic. Kira Yun. I can call her on Monday, Dominic offered. I can brief her on the restructuring plan so she is not caught off guard. No, I said, standing up from the leather chair. I owe her the truth. I will tell her myself. On Monday evening of the 6th week, the spring air in Brooklyn was heavy with the threat of rain. I walked up the 3 flights of creaking wooden stairs to Kira's apartment. She opened the door wearing an oversized college sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled up into a messy knot. She looked surprised to see me standing in her hallway without an appointment. I did not realize we had a meeting, Kira said, holding the door open. We do not, I replied, stepping inside the small, book-lined apartment. But I owe you an explanation, a real one. Kira closed the door and crossed her arms over her chest. Her posture was defensive, the exhaustion clear in the tight lines around her mouth. An explanation about what? About who I really am, I said. I kept my hands out of my pockets, leaving my posture completely open. I am not an outside investor. My name is Sloane Pryor Keating. I founded Keating Consulting 15 years ago. I am the majority owner of the firm. Kira stared at me, her eyes widened, processing the name. She looked at my face, then down at my clothes, then back up to my eyes. You are the owner, Kira whispered. Yes. The silence stretched out. I could see the gears turning in her brilliant, analytical mind. She was connecting the dots, the timeline, the access to the secure human resources files, the interest in a junior analyst's buried compliance report. And then she made the final connection. Vince, Kira said. The word sounded like ash in her mouth. Vince is your husband. Vince is my husband, I confirmed. The shock melted away, instantly replaced by a fierce, burning anger. Kira took a step forward, her hands dropping to her sides. She was 29 years old, standing in a tiny apartment, confronting a woman who possessed enough wealth to buy her entire building with cash. She did not flinch. You knew, Kira said, her voice shaking with rage. You knew from the very beginning. You own the company where I was bullied and silenced for 2 years. You had the power to stop him at any moment. You could have walked into human resources and demanded my files. You could have fired him. And you chose to hide. You are right, I said quietly. I did not deflect. I did not offer excuses about corporate structure or legal liability. I took the hit exactly as she delivered it. Why? Kira demanded. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Why did you let Piper bury my work? Why did you let him steal my projects while you sat safely in your mansion? Because I was afraid, I told her. The truth tasted bitter, but saying it out loud broke the spell it had held over me for a decade. I built the company, but I was terrified of being seen. I thought if I stayed hidden behind Dominic, nobody could ever judge me. Nobody could ever take advantage of me. I thought hiding made me untouchable. I looked around the small apartment, at the stacks of economics books and the open laptop on the dining table. I was wrong, Kira, I said, meeting her angry gaze. Hiding did not protect me. It just allowed the people I trusted to victimize the people who actually deserved my protection. I failed you, and I am deeply sorry. Kira did not soften. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt and took a deep, shuddering breath. So what happens now? Are you going to fire him quietly and sweep the rest of the mess under the rug to protect your public image? No, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed copy of the board meeting agenda. I placed it on the dining table. This Thursday, April 12, we are holding the annual company meeting in the main boardroom. I am going to stand up in front of the entire executive team. I am going to present the forensic audit. I am going to terminate Vince and Piper for cause. Kira looked down at the agenda, then back up at me. And your projects, I continued, my voice steady. I am going to explicitly state for the official corporate record that the Meridian portal, the healthcare module, and the acquisition analysis were authored entirely by Kira Yoon, not by the vice president. Kira stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. The anger in her eyes slowly gave way to a hardened, metallic resolve. She traced the edge of the printed agenda with her finger. Thursday, she said. Thursday morning, I confirmed. I want to be in the room, Kira stated. It was a demand, not a request. I looked at the young woman who had fought so fiercely against a rigged system. She deserved to watch it fall apart. I need you in the room, I said. I left her apartment and walked back out into the Brooklyn night. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address in Westchester. As the car merged onto the highway, I pulled my phone out. I had one unread message from Helen Price. Divorce petition filed and stamped. The restraining order is active. The papers will be served at his desk tomorrow at noon. I locked the screen and leaned my head back against the cold leather seat. The trap was set. The ghost wound was finally closed. I was not going to die quietly in the dark like Raymond Pryor. I was going to step into the light. And I was going to make sure every single person in that boardroom knew exactly who I was. I woke up before the alarm sounded on Thursday morning. It was the 12th of April. I did not reach for the soft, comfortable sweaters I usually wore. Instead, I pulled a structured navy suit from the very back of my closet. It was the first time I had worn a tailored suit since the year I married Vince. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I saw the sharp line of my jaw and the cold, flat gray of my eyes. I saw Raymond Pryor looking back at me. I folded my father's yellowed letter and slipped it into the inside pocket of the blazer, pressing it flat against my chest. I arrived at the Keating Consulting Building just before 8 o'clock. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted coffee from the corner cart and the metallic bite of city exhaust. I stood in the main lobby and watched the digital clock above the security desk flip to exactly 8. 14 floors above me, Dominic executed the command. Information technology revoked Vincent Lassiter's system access. Piper Novak had been locked out of the network 15 minutes earlier. By 8:15, the executive staff began filing into the main boardroom. I stood in the adjacent glass-walled antechamber, watching them through the partially closed blinds. Max Keogh, the oldest member of the board of directors and an old friend of my father, took his usual seat and adjusted his tie. He opened his leather folder, reading the printed agenda that listed a special presentation by the managing director. He had no idea what was actually about to happen. At 8:25, Vince arrived. I watched him try to scan his badge at the heavy double doors. The card reader flashed red. He tried again. The light flashed red a second time. A security guard stepped forward and politely escorted him inside, blaming a system glitch. Vince walked into the boardroom, flashing a tight, practiced smile. He was completely unaware that his digital life had just been erased. He took his seat in the middle of the long mahogany table. Craig sat next to him. Piper sat near the corner, her hands resting quietly in her lap. Kira Yoon sat at the very back of the room, holding a plain manila folder. At the head of the table, the heavy leather chair with the brass nameplate reading S. Pryor remained perfectly empty. Dominic stood up at the head of the table. The low murmur of conversation instantly died down. The bright overhead lights eliminated every shadow in the room. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with the sharp smell of dry erase markers. Max Keogh clicked his pen, a nervous habit that echoed in the quiet space. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dominic said, his gravelly voice projected clearly across the polished wood. "Thank you for gathering for this special session. Before we begin our quarterly review, I have an announcement that is long overdue. For 15 years, I have served as the managing director of this company, but I have never been its owner. The founder and majority shareholder has chosen today to officially introduce herself." Dominic looked directly at the side door. I pushed the heavy metal handle down and stepped into the room. The silence that followed was absolute. Max Keogh stared at me, his eyes widening behind his thick glasses. He gripped the edge of the table and slowly stood up. He recognized the bone structure of the man who had mentored him decades ago. Janine drew in a sharp breath. Craig looked completely confused, his brow furrowed in genuine bewilderment. Piper dropped her phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. Vince froze entirely. His gaze darted from my face, to the brass nameplate at the end of the table, to Dominic, and then back to me. The color drained from his perfectly tanned skin, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit down. I rested my hands on the high back of the leather chair. "My name is Sloane Pryor Keating," I said, keeping my voice even and loud enough to reach the back wall. "I founded this company 15 years ago under my mother's maiden name. I am the majority owner of Pryor Holdings, which holds 100% of Keating Consulting Group." I looked directly at my husband. "I have been silent for far too long. That ends today." I opened my laptop and connected it to the main projector. The massive screen behind me illuminated with the forensic spreadsheets Helen Price had built. I was methodical. I stripped away the emotion and presented the cold, hard data. Over the past 3 years, I announced to the frozen room, a senior executive sitting at this table fabricated $87,000 in client entertainment expenses. There were no clients. The funds were misappropriated. I clicked to the next slide. This individual also established a shell company named Latitude Solutions, registered under his own name, to extract an additional $34,000 in fraudulent consulting invoices. Furthermore, $42,000 in corporate funds were used to purchase unauthorized luxury gifts and jewelry. Every single item was delivered to an apartment in Murray Hill, leased by our human resources director. I clicked to the final summary page. The total embezzlement stands at $163,000. The slide transitioned, displaying the human resources audit log. During this same period, 4 formal complaints were filed by female employees. All 4 were permanently closed without an investigation by Piper Novak. Before anyone could speak, Dominic pressed a button on his tablet. The audio recording from the corporate phone system played through the ceiling speakers. Piper's panicked voice filled the room. "I deleted the complaint from the Yoon girl, and the receipts from Montauk. I approved all of them." The recording ended. The silence that followed was the kind of quiet where you could hear the blood rushing in your own ears. Vince pushed his chair back violently and stood up. His hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. "This is insane," he stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "Sloane, what are you doing?" "I am sitting down," I said. I pulled the heavy leather chair out and sat in it. The brass nameplate gleamed under the overhead lights. "I am doing what I should have done years ago. I am telling the truth." The cascade of realization finally washed over Vince's face. He turned to Dominic, pointing a trembling finger. You knew she owned it. You knew this entire time." 15 years, Dominic replied flatly. Vince looked back at me as if I were a complete stranger. 8 years of rapid promotions, every lucky break, every massive client Dominic had conveniently handed to him. Every time Vince had bragged at dinner parties about building his career from scratch, the illusion was shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "You," Vince whispered. "You put me here. I gave you an opportunity," I told him. "You chose exactly what to do with it." Max Keogh remained standing. His hands were trembling, but not from fear. "Raymond," the old board member said, his voice thick with heavy emotion, "your father would be damn proud of you right now." The ghost wound closed entirely. My father had been spoken of with reverence in the very room I built. I turned my attention to the board of directors. I motioned to terminate Vincent Lassiter, Vice President of Business Development, for cause, effective immediately. "Do I have a second?" Max Keogh seconded the motion. The vote was unanimous. I motioned to terminate Piper Novak, Human Resources Director, for cause. Unanimous again. Piper did not say a single word. She stood up, picked her phone off the carpet, and grabbed her leather bag. When she reached the heavy double doors, she stopped and looked back at Kira Yoon. Kira met her gaze with a hard, unwavering stare. Piper turned around and walked out of the room. Vince gripped the edge of the mahogany table. "You will hear from my lawyer," he threatened, though the words lacked any real conviction. "I already have," I replied. "The divorce petition was filed and stamped on Monday. The temporary restraining order on your accounts is active. You will be formally served at your desk before you leave this building. The infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement has been triggered. Your attorney, Harvey Roth, received the certified forensic report this morning. He will likely advise you that you have forfeited any equitable claim to this company." Vince opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. 2 security guards stepped into the room. They placed their hands on his arms and escorted my husband away from the table. His corporate badge was already dead. A cardboard box containing his personal belongings would be mailed to him. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him. The boardroom remained completely silent for 10 long seconds. "One more thing," I said. I stood up and looked directly at the back of the room. Kira Yoon filed a compliance report 9 months ago. It was suppressed by Human Resources. I want the official corporate record to show that the Meridian Client Portal, the Healthcare Workflow Module, and the second quarter acquisition analysis were authored entirely by Kira Yoon, not by the person who claimed the credit. Kira sat very still. Her eyes were bright red, but she refused to let the tears fall. "Miss Yoon," I said, projecting my voice clearly across the room. "Effective today, you are promoted to Senior Business Analyst." By 11 o'clock, I was sitting alone in my new office. Dominic brought me a cup of black coffee and set it on the desk. My cell phone sat next to the keyboard. I had 23 missed calls from Vince. They had rolled in steadily throughout the morning. The first few voicemails were panicked demands for an explanation. The next batch shifted into frantic legal threats, quoting whatever Harvey Roth had told him before dropping him as a client. The final messages were nothing but desperate, heavy breathing followed by a defeated click. I did not listen to them in real time. I treated them like cold data. The consequences were cascading exactly as Helen Price had predicted. Vince had been terminated for cause, meaning he received 0 severance pay. The embezzlement file had been officially referred to the Manhattan District Attorney. The prenuptial agreement held firm, protecting my corporate equity. I had agreed to split the marital assets, the house in Westchester and the joint savings, exactly down the middle. I did not need his half. I just needed him entirely removed from my business. Piper faced a potential civil suit from the other employees she had silenced, and her professional licensing board was initiating a formal review. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I drafted a company-wide email. Effective today, Keating Consulting announces the following executive changes. Founder and majority owner Sloan Pryor Keating assumes the role of chairwoman of the board. Vice President Vincent Lassiter has been terminated for cause. Human Resources Director Piper Novak has been terminated for cause. Senior Business Analyst Kira Yoon has been promoted. An independent compliance review will be conducted over the next 60 days. Keating Consulting was founded on integrity. Today, we return to that founding principle. I clicked send. Within minutes, the atmosphere in the bullpen shifted. There were shocked whispers, but beneath the surprise, there was a palpable wave of relief from the people who had endured Vince's toxic management for years. A junior marketing woman stood at her cubicle, reading the email with tears streaming down her face. They were tears of pure relief. At 7 o'clock that evening, the building was nearly empty. I stayed behind, walking back into the main boardroom. The ergonomic chairs were tucked neatly under the mahogany table. The empty coffee cups had been cleared away. The Manhattan sunset poured through the 14th floor windows, painting the room in deep shades of orange and violet. The scent of polished wood hung in the quiet air. The distant sound of city traffic drifted up from the streets below. The dying sunlight caught the edge of the brass nameplate at the head of the table. S. Pryor. I pulled the heavy leather chair out and sat down for the second time. This time, it felt entirely different. This time, I belonged exactly where I was sitting. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and pulled out the yellowed letter from my father. I read the final lines one last time. Step out into the light, even if it blinds you. I had spent 15 years hiding my empire. I had spent 11 years participating in a fraudulent marriage. $163,000 had been stolen. 4 women had been silenced. But today, a letter from a dead man had finally given me the permission I needed to exist. I looked around the large room. The framed photograph of the leadership team still hung on the wall near the door. It did not have my face in it. Tomorrow, that picture would come down. A new one would go up. My phone vibrated against the wooden table. It was not a call from Vince. It was a text message from Kira Yoon. "Thank you for today," she wrote. "Thank you for my name." I stared at the bright screen. I had built a company that employed 120 people, but in that moment, the only thing that made the 15 years of hiding worth the pain were those 8 simple words from a 29-year-old woman. I typed my reply. "Thank you for not giving up." I turned off the boardroom lights and walked out to the elevator. I rode down to the lobby and stepped through the revolving glass doors. The April night was warm, a sharp contrast to the freezing March evening when I had stood on the sidewalk and made the decision to fight back. I looked down at my left hand. I was still wearing the silver wedding band. I had not taken it off yet. I would eventually, but not tonight. Tonight, I just wanted to walk. For the first time in 11 years, I did not have a destination or a meticulously calculated plan. I merged into the crowd of people walking down the avenue. And for the first time in 15 years, if a stranger stopped and asked me who I was finally ready to tell them my real name. Sometimes we build walls to protect ourselves from getting hurt. You might think that hiding your success, your strength, or your true self will keep you safe from people who want to take advantage of you. But hiding does not protect you. It only makes you invisible. When you shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable, you hand them the power to control your life. True strength is not about building a fortress of secrets. It is about stepping into the light, owning exactly what you have built, and demanding the respect you have earned. It takes courage to claim your real identity, but it is the only way to truly live. Have you ever dimmed your own light or hidden your accomplishments just to keep the peace in a relationship? How did you finally find the courage to step out of the shadows? Share your story with us in the comments.